Hey guys, tonight we are going to do something a little different. We're not just visiting a place, we're moving in. We're going to pack our meager belongings, leave our old lives behind, and step onto a ship bound for the land of opportunity, America. Specifically, late 19th century New York City. Now, I should warn you, based on the historical reality of our destination, the Lower East Side, you might metaphorically, or literally, not survive the first day. The hygiene standards were, let's say, creatively interpreted. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop me a comment and let me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice isn't the sight, but the smell. For weeks, the only scent has been salt, damp wood, and the close human smell of several hundred people packed into storage. But now a new aroma drifts across the water, carried on the morning breeze. It's a complex, almost aggressive perfume of coal smoke, roasting peanuts, and something else, something vaguely sour and organic that you can't quite place. It's the smell of a million lives being lived all at once. You are pressed against the ship's railing, a cheap wool shawl pulled tight around your shoulders despite the mild air. Your knuckles are white. Beside you, others murmur in a dozen different languages, their voices a low, excited hum. And then you see it. A colossal copper-green woman, holding a torch to the sky. She seems to rise directly from the water, a silent, powerful promise of the new world you've spent your life savings to reach. A lump forms in your throat. Every whispered rumor of this place suddenly feels real. The ship doesn't dock near the statue. It glides past her, moving towards the southern tip of a long, thin island crowded with buildings that seem to scrape the clouds. This is Manhattan. Your destination is a circular, foot-like building at the water's edge called Castle Garden. This is the main processing center for immigrants, the gateway to your new life. Historians point out that before Ellis Island became the famous icon in 1892, it was this stout, repurposed fort that welcomed millions of newcomers, including perhaps your own ancestors. The gangplank is lowered with a heavy thud, and the crowd surges forward. You touch the single, lumpy bag that holds everything you own. The journey across the Atlantic was a lesson in patience, but this is a test of will. You are pushed and jostled, the hopeful energy now mixed with anxious shoving. Your feet finally touch solid ground, and the sensory world explodes. The air is thick enough to chew. The sour smell you detected from the ship is much stronger here. It's a foundation of horsemen, or thousands of horses pull cars and carriages through the city, every day layered with the acrid bite of factory pollution, the faint but persistent stench of raw sewage seeping into the harbor, and the sharp, salty smell of fish from the nearby markets. You try to breathe through your mouth, but it doesn't help much. The noise is a physical force. Iron-rimmed wheels clatter violently on cobblestones. Steam whistles shriek from ferries and tugboats. Men shout, trying to be heard over the din, hawking wares, directing traffic, or calling for fares. You don't understand most of the words, but the urgency is universal. You shuffle along in a line that snakes into the great hall of Castle Garden. Inside, it's cavernous and echoes with the sounds of crying children and the clipped, official tones of inspectors. You hand over your papers, your hands trembling slightly. An officer in a blue uniform asks you questions in heavily accented English. He points to your eyes, checks your scalp, and makes a chop mark on the back of your coat. You don't know what it means, but you're waved through. Stepping out of Castle Garden, you are truly on your own. This is where the real danger begins. You've been warned about the runners, men who swarm the exits, offering to help newcomers find their way or carry their bags. They seem friendly, but many are just looking to fleece the unwary, leading them to overpriced boarding houses for a kickback, or simply vanishing with their luggage. This is a strange, almost forgotten footnote of the immigrant experience, a kind of predatory ecosystem that thrived on the confusion of arrival. You pull your bag closer and try to look like you know what you're doing. You have a slip of paper in your pocket with an address, scrawled in your cousin's handwriting. It seems impossibly far away. Historians still debate the extent to which these new arrivals felt hope versus sheer terror in these first few moments. Was the overwhelming chaos seen as a sign of vibrant opportunity or a terrifying omen of the struggle to calm your own heart? Right now feels a dizzying, exhausting mix of both. And take your first uncertain step into the roaring labyrinth of New York City. You decide to walk. A horse-drawn streetcar clatter rests past, bells clanging, but the fare is a few cents you cannot spare. Every penny is a precious seed you hope to plant in this new soil. You clutch the paper with the address Orchard Street and point yourself east, using the sun, now climbing higher in the sky, as a crude compass. The map in your mind is a simple one walk away from the water towards the heart of the island. The first few blocks are a dizzying canyon of stone and brick. Buildings loom, taller than any you have ever seen, their ornate facades staring down at the chaos below. Men in dark suits and bowler hats rush past with an air of immense importance, their faces tight with purpose. They navigate the crowded sidewalks with unpracticed, aggressive grace, sidestepping you as if you were a piece of street furniture. You feel small, invisible, a ghost from another world floating through their solid reality. And then, gradually, the city begins to change. The streets narrow. The grand, imposing buildings give way to shorter, more uniform brick structures, 5 or 6 stories high, packed shoulder to shoulder with no space in between. The English you overheard downtown dissolves into a bubbling stew of Yiddish, Italian, German, unpolished. The air, if it's possible, becomes even thicker. You have arrived in the Lower East Side. This is not a place you pass through, it's a place you wade through. The sidewalks are not for walking. They are for living. They are for living. They are for living. They are for living. They are for living as workshops, storefronts, and social clubs. Women sit on the front stoops, cold stoops, sharing gossip while peeling potatoes or mending clothes. Children, seemingly hundreds of them, dart in and out of the crowds, their games spilling from the sidewalk into the street, forcing carts and wagons to a crawl. Your primary obstacle is the push carts. They line every curb, a mobile marketplace that forms the economic backbone of the neighborhood. You see cars piled high with gleaming fish on ice, barrels of pickles swimming in murky brine, mountains of second-hand clothes, and stacks of bread. A man with a magnificent mustache sells steaming hot sausages, their aroma momentarily cutting through the general miasma. Everything is for sale, and every vendor is shouting, their voices a constant, percussive rhythm against the backdrop of noise. You have to step into the street to get by. And this is where you make a terrible discovery. The street is not paved with a thick, viscous black mud. It's a primordial ooze composed of dirt, water from unseen sources, and most potently, horse manure. You quickly learn to watch your step, but it's a losing battle. The hem of your skirt or trousers is soon stained with the filth of the city. Here's a little historical tidbit for you at the time. New York's roughly 100,000 horses produced over 2.5 million pounds of manure every single day. The system for cleaning it up was sporadic and laughably ineffective, creating a permanent layer of grime that defined the urban landscape. The smell is a character in itself. It's not just one smell, but a whole symphony of them. There's the ever-present foundation of horse and draught, but layered on top are the smells of humans' wet, cheap perfume, coal smoke from every chimney, the yeasty smell of bakeries, the sharp tang of tanneries, and the heavy, metallic scent of blood from the butcher shops, whose gutters often run reed into the street. You learn to breathe shallowly, to tune it out, but it's always there, a constant reminder of the intense, compressed humanity all around you. Historians have long debated the true nature of neighborhoods like this. To outsiders and too many reformers of the era, the Lower East Side was simply a slum, a dangerous, filthy, chaotic pit of human misery. But to the people who lived here, was it a vibrant, self-contained world, a place of immense social solidarity where, despite the poverty, you could find a job, a spouse, a kosher butcher, and a community that understood your language and your customs. The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere in that complicated, messy middle. You are jostled, pushed, and spun around. You stop a woman to ask for directions, pointing at the name on your paper. She doesn't speak your language, but she understands. She smiles, revealing several missing teeth, and points you further down the street with a weathered hand. You nod your thanks, a small moment of human connection in the overwhelming sea of faces. Finally, you see it. A small, faded street sign that reads Orchard Street. A wave of relief, so profound it almost makes your knees buckle, washes over you. You walk down the block. Your eyes scanning the numbers crudely painted above the doorways. 48, 50, 52, there it is. You stop and look up. It's a 5-story brick building, indistinguishable from its neighbors. Faded laundry, the flags of the poor as they were sometimes called, hangs from lines strung between its windows and the building across the street, creating a canopy of rags that blocks out what little sun penetrates this narrow gap. This is it, your new home. You stand there on the crowded sidewalk, staring up at the building. It's not imposing like the ones downtown, just relentlessly there. A solid, unadorned wall of brick, scarred by weather and time. Dozens of windows stare back at you like blank, tired eyes. A few artwork, stuffed with rags to keep out the wind. From one open window on an upper floor, the sound of a baby crying drifts down, a thin, sharp wail that is quickly swallowed by the street's roar. The entrance is a dark, uninviting archway. There's no grand lobby, no welcoming doorman. Just a gaping hole in the building's facade. The stoop, a set of worn stone steps leading up to this entrance, is currently occupied by 2 older men playing checkers on an overturned crate and 3 young children poking a dead rat with a stick. They all pause to watch you approach, their faces a mixture of curiosity and indifference. You are the day's new spectacle, and tomorrow there will be another. This type of building is called a tenement. The word itself comes from the Latin tenere, to hold or to dwell. Initially, it was a neutral term for a rented dwelling. But by this point in the 19th century, it has become synonymous with the overcrowded, unsanitary apartment buildings that house the city's working poor and immigrant populations. Your building, likely constructed a few decades ago, is what's known as a pre-law tenement. This means it was built before the first, largely ineffective, Tenement House Act of 1867. Those early laws made some feeble attempts at reform, like requiring 1 toilet for every 20 residents, a rule that sounds appalling now but was considered an improvement then. Your cousin's letter said he lives on the 4th floor. You take a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and something vaguely like boiled cabbage, and step over the threshold. The transition from the chaotic brightness of the street to the interior gloom is jarring. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust to the near-total darkness of the entryway. The hallway is narrow, no more than 3 feet wide. The walls are thick with a grimy dampness that you can feel even in the cool air. The floor is made of wooden planks, warped and uneven with dark, sticky patches that you try your best to avoid. There's a faint, flickering light coming from a single gas jet high on the wall, hissing softly. It casts long, dancing shadows that make the small space feel even more claustrophobic. And the smell. If the street was a symphony of odors, the hallway is a concentrated, suffocating blast. The general street smells are still there, but now they are trapped, unable to escape. They are mixed with the stale, greasy aroma of 100 different meals being cooked in cramped, unventilated rooms. There's the sharp, ammonia-like scent seeping up from the cellars and the ever-present, underlying smell of damp rot. One of the most curious and specific smells, noted by many visitors at the time, was the odor of stale urine, which seemed to have soaked permanently into the wooden floors and plaster walls. It's a smell that clings to your clothes and the back of your throat. You can hear the life of the building through the thin walls. A heated argument in what sounds like Italian from one apartment. A mother singing a lullaby in Yiddish from another. The rhythmic thump-thump of someone operating a sewing machine, a sound that seems to be coming from everywhere at once. The building is a living organism, and you can hear its heartbeat, its arguments, and its lullabies. A door creaks open down the hall, and a woman peers out. She gives you a quick, appraising look and then retreats back into her apartment, the door clicking shut. There's no welcome wagon here. The community might be tight-knit, but trust is earned, not given. You spot the staircase at the end of the hall. It's more of a ladder than a proper set of stairs, steep, narrow, and shrouded in darkness. There's a banister, but it's loose and sticky to the touch. Historians are still trying to fully grasp the psychological impact of living in such environments. How does constant darkness, noise, and filth shape a person's worldview, their hopes, their very sense of self? Some argue it bred resilience and a fierce will to survive, while others contend it created a deep, lasting despair that was passed down through generations. You place your foot on the first step. It groans in protest under your weight. Your bag feels impossibly heavy. The journey across the ocean was one kind of trial. The journey up these 4 flights of stairs feels like another entirely. You are not just climbing to an apartment, you are ascending into the heart of tenement life. A world hidden from the sun. A world that will now become your own. You grip the wobbly banister, your knuckles brushing against the grimy wall, and begin to climb into the dark. The climb is a journey through layers of sound and smell. Each floor has its own distinct personality, its own unique blend of domestic odors and languages. The first landing is dominated by the smell of garlic and frying oil. The second smells of wet wool and cigar smoke. The gaslight from the ground floor is long gone, and the only illumination comes from the faint light seeping from under doorways. You are climbing blind, one hand on the rickety banister, the other clutching your bag, feeling your way up with your feet. The stairs are not just steep, they are treacherous. Decades of use have worn the wooden roads into smooth, concave hollows. Some are cracked, and you can feel splinters through the thin soles of your shoes. You move slowly, cautiously, listening to the creaks and groans of the structure. It feels fragile, as if the whole thing could give way at any moment. This wasn't just a feeling. Partial collapses of tenement stairs were a genuine, documented hazard of the time. Halfway up to the 3rd floor, a door swings open and a small boy, no older than 6, comes barreling out and clatters down the stairs past you, his bare feet making soft, rapid thuds on the wood. He doesn't even seem to notice you in the dark. He moves with the effortless, thoughtless confidence of someone who has navigated this terrain their entire life. To him, this vertical, shadowy world is as normal as a field of grass might have been to you in your old home. You finally reach the 4th floor landing, your breath coming in ragged gasps, your legs burning. Your heart is pounding, partly from the exertion and partly from the suffocating closeness of the air. It's noticeably warmer up here. Heat from all the floors below, from the cooking stoves, the gas lights, and the sheer body heat of hundreds of people rises and gets trapped in these upper hallways. The landing is just a small square space, barely big enough for 2 people to pass each other. There are 4 doors, 2 on each side. A thin, yellow line of light is visible under one of them. You fumble in your pocket for your cousin's letter, trying to remember the apartment number. 14th, you squint in the gloom, trying to make out the faded, painted numbers on the doors. You can just barely discern a 1 and a 4 on the door to your right. You raise your hand to knock, but hesitate. You can hear voices inside, a mix of your native language and the clipped, unfamiliar sounds of English. There's a sudden burst of laughter, and it gives you a pang of hope. Laughter means life. It means that despite the grime and the darkness, joy can still find a way to exist. You knock. The voices inside fall silent. You hear the scuff of a chair being pushed back, and footsteps approaching the door. A lock scrapes, and the door opens a crack. A man's face appears in the gap, thin, tired, but with familiar eyes. It's your cousin. He looks older than you remember, the optimism in his face etched over with lines of weariness. A slow smile spreads across his face. "You made it," he says, his voice raspy. He opens the door wider and pulls you into a rough, welcoming hug. For a moment, you bury your face in his shoulder, overwhelmed by a dizzying cocktail of relief and exhaustion. The smell of his counter mix of sweat, machine oil, and tobacco is the most comforting thing you've experienced all day. He pulls back and holds you at arm's length, looking you over. You look tired. The journey was bad. You can only nod, too weary to form words. He gestures for you to come inside. Come, meet the family. We don't have much, but you are welcome here." He leads you into the room, and the door closes behind you, shutting out the dark hallway. You are now inside the apartment, your new home. Your first impression is of people. The room is impossibly full of them. You see your cousin's wife, whom you've only known from a faded photograph, holding a baby. Two young children, a boy and a girl, stare at you with wide, curious eyes from their perch on the edge of a bed. And there's another man, a boarder, sitting at the small table in the corner, who nods at you silently before returning to his newspaper. The apartment consists of this one room. This is the parlor, the kitchen, the dining room, and for some of them, the bedroom. The air is thick with the steam from a pot bubbling on a small, coal-burning stove in the corner. A single, bare gas jet on the wall provides a flickering, yellow light that makes everyone's skin look sallow. A small detail that often gets overlooked is the heat from these lights. A single gas flame could raise the temperature of a small room by several degrees, adding to the oppressive heat in summer. Your cousin gestures to a space on the floor. You can put your bag there. We'll make a space for you to sleep tonight. The floor is your bed. This wasn't an insult, it was a simple statement of fact. You are the newest addition to an already overflowing household. Historians call this practice taking on borders, and it was a crucial economic survival strategy. Rent was high and wages were low. Every spare inch of floor space was a potential source of income. You are not just a relative to be cared for, you are now part of the family's fragile economy. You look around the crowded, stuffy room at the faces of these strangers who are now your family, and a single, stark thought comes to you: the journey isn't over. It has only just begun. Your cousin's wife, Maria, offers you a small, chipped cup of weak tea. You take it with grateful, trembling hands. The warmth seeps into your fingers, a small comfort in this overwhelming new reality. You sit on the edge of the only bed in the room, trying to make yourself as small as possible. Your eyes begin to take in the details of the space. The room is maybe 10 feet by 12 feet. It serves as the kitchen, evidenced by the small, black cast iron stove in the corner, a pail of coal beside it. A few pots and pans hang from nails on the wall. It's also the dining room, centered around a small, wobbly wooden table with two chairs. One is occupied by the boarder, the other by your cousin. Everyone else sits on the bed or the floor. And it's the bedroom. The bed you're sitting on, a thin mattress on a simple iron frame, is where your cousin Maria and their baby sleep. The two older children, you learn, sleep on a pile of rags in the corner. The boarder gets the other corner. Your spot is the sliver of floor space by the door. This was the reality of tenement living, an entire family, plus a boarder or two, crammed into a single front room. But then you notice something strange. There is another doorway in the back wall, covered by a thin, grimy curtain. Curiosity gets the better of you, and you ask your cousin what's back there. "Ah," he says, with a sigh that seems to carry the weight of the entire building. "That is the other room, the bedroom." You are confused. He sees the look on your face and gestures for you to follow him. He pulls back the curtain, and you peer into the space beyond. Darkness. A profound, absolute darkness that seems to swallow the light from the front room. You step inside, and the air changes immediately. It's cool, still, and heavy with a damp, musty smell like a cellar. As your eyes slowly, painfully adjust, you can just make out the shape of another bed. This, your cousin explains, is where he and Maria would sleep if they didn't have the children. Sometimes, if a family was large enough, this back room would be packed with sleeping children. You feel along the wall, expecting to find a window, a source of light and air. There is nothing, just flat, cold plaster. You have just discovered the most infamous and dangerous feature of the pre-war tenement, the interior, windowless room. Developers in the mid-19th century were aligned to maximize their profits by cramming as many rental units as possible onto a standard 25 by 100 foot city lot. Their solution was the railroad apartment, a series of rooms, typically 3, lined up one behind the other like train cars. The front room had windows onto the street. The back room might have a window overlooking the squalid rear yard. But the room in the middle, it had no windows at all, ventilated only by the air that drifted in from the other two rooms. You can feel the air in here. It's thick, unmoving. You take a breath and it feels like you're inhaling dust and dampness. Your cousin tells you that in the summer, this room is unbearable, an airless oven. In the winter, it's a freezing, damp cave. This is a good moment to bring up a curious, and now debunked, scientific theory that was widely believed at the time, the miasma theory. For centuries, most people, including many doctors, believed that diseases like cholera, chlamydia, or the Black Death were caused by miasma, a noxious form of bad air or night air. They thought that diseases were spread by the foul smells from rotting organic matter. While the theory was wrong, we now know about germ theory. That diseases are caused by microorganisms, it wasn't entirely useless. The belief that bad smells cause disease led to some of the first public health and sanitation reforms. Cleaning up filth to get rid of the smell inadvertently also got rid of the germs. So, in a way, people living in this tenement understood that this dark, smelly room was unhealthy, even if they didn't know the precise scientific reason. They knew it was bad air. They just didn't know that the air itself was filled with invisible microbes. Historians still debate how much of this was formal knowledge and how much was just innate, instinctual and human understanding that a place without light and fresh air is not a place where life can thrive. You back out of the dark room, a shiver running down your spine that has nothing to do with the cold. You feel a new, dawning horror at the reality of this place. It's one thing to see poverty and dirt on the street, in a public space. It's another to find that the darkness has followed you inside, that it is a permanent feature of your home, built directly into the walls. You look at the two small children who seem perfectly content playing their game in the corner of the front room. This is their normal. They have likely never known anything else. The thought is more chilling than the air in the back room. The single, sputtering gaslight on the wall seems to flicker, and for a moment, the shadows in the room deepen, and you feel the true weight of the tenement pressing in on you. The dream of America, the land of opportunity and wide open spaces, feels very, very far away right now. After an hour or so of quiet, stilted conversation, a new and urgent need makes itself known. The weak tea you drank earlier has worked its way through you. You catch Mary a sigh and ask, as politely as you can, where the facilities are. She gives you a look that is a mixture of pity and weary resignation. She doesn't point to a corner of the room or to a door down the hall. Instead, she jerks her head towards the window that looks out onto the street. Out back, she says, in the yard. You are confused. Out back you are on the 4th floor. Do you have to go all the way back down those 4 flights of treacherous stairs, across the filthy street, and into another building? Your cousin sees your confusion and clarifies, no, not out the front, in the rear yard, through the building. He explains that you have to go back down to the ground floor hallway. At the very back of the hall beyond the staircase is a door. That door leads to the tenement's rear yard, and in that yard you will find what you are looking for. He hands you a few squares of old newspaper. Don't stay too long, he advises, his tone grim. It's not a place for visiting. You feel a sense of dread pool in your stomach. The casual, almost ominous nature of his warning is more unsettling than if he had just described it. What could be so bad that it warranted such a remark? You nod, thank him for the paper, and steel yourself for the journey. You exit the relative sanctuary of the apartment and are once again plunged into the darkness of the 4th floor landing. The smells of the hallway seem to have intensified, or perhaps you are just more sensitive to them now. The descent is faster than the climb, but no less dangerous. You grip the banister tightly, your feet finding the worn spots on the stairs with a clumsy familiarity. You pass the other floors, catching snippets of life through the thin doors, an argument, a crying baby, the clatter of a dropped pan. You finally reach the ground floor. The hissing gas jet is still the only source of light. You walk to the end of the hall, past the base of the stairs, into a section that is even darker and damper than the entrance. The air here is thick with the smell of mildew and rot. You can hear the faint scuttling of rats in the walls. You find the door your cousin mentioned. It's made of heavy, rough-hewn wood, and the iron handle is cold and damp. You pull it open with a groan of protesting hinges, and are hit with a wall of stench so powerful it makes your eyes water. It is a foul, overpowering odor of human waste and decay, 100 times worse than anything you smelled on the street or in the hallway. It's a physical assault. You gag, bringing the collar of your shirt up to your nose, but it does little to block the smell. You have found the source of the sour organic smell you first detected from the ship in the harbor. It wasn't the whole city. It was this. It was thousands of little pockets of decay like this one, all breathing their foul air into the sky. You step through the doorway and into the rear yard, and your heart sinks. If you were expecting even a small patch of green, a hint of nature, you were mistaken. The yard is not a yard at all. It is a pit. A dark, narrow, brick-lined chasm no more than 2 or 3 feet wide, and perhaps 20 feet long. It's an air shaft, a slim gap between your building and the one behind it. High above you can see a tiny, postage-stamp-sized patch of grey sky, but down here at the bottom, it is perpetual twilight. The ground is not earth or cobblestone. It is a slick, black mire of mud and God knows what else. And there, against the back wall, are 2 small, dilapidated wooden structures, like sentry boxes for some forgotten, miserable army. They are squat, with slanted roofs and ill-fitting doors. These are the privies, the toilets. This is the dark secret of the tenement, shared by every family in the building. Some estimates suggest that in a typical tenement, over 100 people, men, women, and children would have to share these 2 outhouses. A strange historical fact: some of the earliest tenement reform laws focused specifically on the school sinks or privies, mandating they be connected to the sewer line. However, the connection often clogged, and landlords rarely paid for cleaning, making the situation arguably worse. Instead of being chucked away, would just back up, creating overflowing cesspools. Historians debate whether the psychological impact of this lack of privacy was worse than the physical health risks. For people coming from rural villages, where privacy was a given, the sudden, forced intimacy of the shared privy must have been a profound shock, a daily stripping away of human dignity. You look at the 2 wooden sheds. One has its door hanging open at a crooked angle. The other is closed. There is a line. 2 women stand ahead of you, their faces grim, their shawls pulled tight. They don't speak or make eye contact. This is not a social space. It is a place of grim necessity. You take your place at the end of the line, standing in the stinking mud, your back to the damp brick wall, and wait. The journey to the privy is not just a walk downstairs, it's a descent into the very bottom of your new world. The line moves with agonizing slowness. One of the women ahead of you mutters a curse in a language you don't understand, her patience clearly worn thin. The air in this narrow shaft is so foul and stagnant that you can feel it coating your tongue. You try to breathe through your mouth, but the taste is almost worse than the smell. You focus on the tiny patch of sky visible far above, a cruel reminder of a clean, open world that feels a million miles away. Finally, the woman at the front of the line finishes, the door of the privy creaks open, and she emerges, her face a mask of grim determination. She doesn't look at you as she hurries past, eager to escape this pit. It is now your turn. You approach the small wooden shed with a sense of profound reluctance. The door, swollen with damp, scrapes against the muddy ground as you pull it open. You step inside and have to physically stop yourself from gagging and running back out. The interior is pitch black. There are no windows, no vents. The only light is the sliver that comes through the open door. The space is barely large enough to turn around in. The floor is covered in the same slick, unit unfightable filth as the yard outside, only here it's thicker, more treacherous. The toilet itself is just a wooden bench with 2 rough, splintery holes cut into it. Below the bench is a deep brick-lined pit, a cesspool, that is shared with the privy next door. It's supposed to be emptied periodically by night soil collectors, a real profession at the time, men who came with carts in the dead of night to haul the waste away. But in a building like this, with a landlord who likely lived miles away and cared only for the rent, that service was infrequent at best and often non-existent. The pit is overflowing. Waste is piled up to the level of the bench, and in some places spilling over onto the floor. The stench is indescribable, a physical presence that presses in on you from all sides. It's the concentrated smell of months, perhaps years, of human neglect. The walls are covered in damp, slimy streaks. Swarms of flies buzz in the darkness, their droning the only sound beside your own ragged breathing. You feel a wave of nausea and dizziness. This isn't just dirty, it's a biohazard, a perfect breeding ground for disease. You now understand your cousin's warning. This place is dangerous. You hold your breath, trying to complete your task as quickly as humanly possible, avoiding contact with any surface. The newspaper your cousin gave you suddenly feels like the most pathetic, inadequate imaginable. Here's a horrificously practical tidbit from that era because these privies were so vile, many residents, especially children or the elderly, would avoid them altogether, particularly at night or in bad weather. The alternative was to use a bucket or a chamber pot in their apartment. But what did they do with the contents with no indoor plumbing? They would often just dump it out the window, either into the street or, more commonly, into the rear yard or air shaft, the very place you are standing now. This practice, known as tossing, contributed to the filth and disease, creating a vicious cycle of squalor. As you back out of the privy, you notice something else. The brick walls of the air shaft are streaked and stained, not just from weather, but from the cascades of refuse thrown from the windows above. You look down at the muck on the ground and realize with a fresh wave of horror that it's not just mud and seepage from the overflowing privy. It's a compacted layer of everything the building's residents have discarded. You pull the privy door shut, the sound a dull thud in the oppressive silence. Your hands feel contaminated, your clothes feel contaminated. The very air in your lungs feels contaminated. You hurry back towards the hallway door, stumbling in the gloom, desperate for the relative freshness of the hallway you considered suffocating just 10 minutes ago. Historians often debate the agency of people living in these conditions. Were they passive victims of their environment, or did they actively fight against the filth? The evidence suggests both. While many succumb to the overwhelming nature of the squalor, there are also countless accounts of mothers scrubbing their small apartments relentlessly, of communities pooling money to pay for a privy cleaning, of a constant, desperate, and often losing battle to maintain a sliver of cleanliness and dignity. The very existence of this battle is a testament to their resilience. You burst back into the ground floor hall, pulling the heavy door shut behind you, sealing the monster back in its lair. You lean against the grimy wall, taking deep, shuddering breaths of the stale, cabbage-scented air. It smells like perfume. It smells like perfume. It smells like life. You have survived your first trip to the privy. But the knowledge of what lies at the bottom of the building, just a few yards from where families are living and sleeping, will now be a permanent fixture in your mind. A dark foundation upon which your new life is being built. You make your way back up the 4 flights of stairs, the burning in your legs a distant annoyance compared to the lingering disgust from the yard. When you re-enter the apartment, Maria looks at you and seems to understand everything without you saying a word. She hands you a small basin of murky, lukewarm water and a rough piece of soap. From this morning, she says, indicating the water. You look at the basin. It's barely a gallon of water. And then you realize this single basin is likely the family's entire supply for washing hands, faces, and perhaps even dishes for a good portion of the day. Every drop is precious. You dip your hands in, the lye-heavy soap stinging the small cuts on your fingers. The water immediately turns a shade darker. You feel a pang of guilt for using so much of this limited resource. This brings you to the next fundamental challenge of tenement life, the colossal, back-breaking chore of obtaining water. In the morning, your cousin rouses you before dawn. The room is still shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the faint ember stove. Time to get water, he grunts. He hands you a heavy wooden bucket. Maria is already awake, nursing the baby quietly in the corner. This, you learn, is a daily ritual, a race against the other residents of the building. You follow him down the stairs. The building is quiet, a sleeping beast. You emerge into the pre-dawn chill of the street. It's a different world from the chaos of yesterday. The streets are empty, save for a few other figures, mostly women and older children, scurrying through the gloom, all carrying buckets. They all have the same destination. Your cousin leads you not to the foul-smelling rear yard, but back through the central hallway of the tenement and into the front courtyard, a small paved area between the stoop and the sidewalk. There, mounted on a low brick wall, is a single iron spigot. This is it, the sole source of water for the entire building. one faucet for more than 100 people. There is already a small line. A few women are huddled together, their shawls pulled tight, their buckets resting at their feet. They greet your cousin with tired nods. The mood is subdued, a silent understanding of the shared hardship. The water doesn't flow freely. You have to work a heavy iron hand pump. When it's your turn, your cousin shows you how. You grip the cold, smooth handle and begin to pump. It's stiff and reluctant. You have to put your whole body into it, a rhythmic, straining motion. After a few creaking, dry pumps, water begins to gush out in violent, sputtering bursts, splashing onto the grimy ground around the pump. You hold your bucket underneath, the cold water drumming against the wood. It takes several minutes of strenuous pumping to fill it. By the time it's full, your arms and back are aching. This single bucket of water weighs around 40 pounds. And now you have to carry it up for flights of stairs. This is a piece of history that is almost impossible for us to truly comprehend, the sheer physical labor required for a substance we get by simply turning a knob. Historians estimate that a family needed at least 10 to 15 gallons of water a day for basic cooking, cleaning and washing. That's 3 or 4 trips up and down the stairs, hauling a total of 120 to 160 pounds of water. It was a brutal daily workout, performed mostly by women and children before their actual day of work or chores even began. You hoist the bucket, its rope handle digging into your palm. The first few steps are manageable, but by the second landing, your arm is screaming in protest. You have to stop, switch hands, your breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The water sloshes over the rim, splashing onto the dirty stairs and your skirt. You now understand why the stairs are perpetually damp. Historians still debate the specific social consequences of this water hierarchy. Did families on the lower floors who had an easier time getting water have a higher social standing? Did they use more water and thus maintain a higher level of cleanliness, creating visible class distinctions within a single, impoverished building? Or did the shared struggle create a sense of solidarity, with neighbors helping each other out? The evidence points to a mix of both, a complex social fabric woven around this single, vital resource. You finally stumble onto the 4th floor landing, spilling a good portion of the water in the final few steps. You haul the bucket into the apartment and set it down with a heavy thud, your entire body trembling with exertion. This one bucket of water, which you have spent nearly half an hour fetching, will have to be used for making coffee, for boiling potatoes, for washing faces, and for cleaning up spills. Every drop is guarded, nothing is wasted. You look at the bucket of water, now sitting in the corner of the dim room. It doesn't look like a simple resource anymore. It looks like what it is, a treasure, won through sweat and pain. And you know, with a sinking feeling, that you will have to do this again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after, and the day after that. It is a relentless, Sisyphean task, the price of admission for a single day of life in this place. The precious bucket of water sits in the corner, a silent testament to your morning's labor. Later in the day, Maria decides it's time to do some laundry. You watch, fascinated and appalled, as she prepares for this monumental task. She doesn't take the clothes downstairs to the yard. That would be impossible. The washing happens right here, in the one-room apartment. She takes the largest pot the family owns, fills it with a carefully measured amount of water from the bucket, and places it on the stove to heat. The room, already stuffy, begins to fill with steam. Next, she produces a washboard, a corrugated piece of metal or glass set in a wooden frame and a large, galvanized metal tub. She places the tub on the floor in the small, cleared space between the table and the bed. Into this, she pours the hot water, a little bit of precious soap shaved into it, and adds the dirty clothes, a few of your cousin's work shirts, the children's dresses, and some baby clothes. Then, the real work begins. She kneels on the hard wooden floor, her back bent, and scrubs each piece of clothing against the washboard. The sound is rhythmic and harsh. Scrape, scrape. It's a sound of pure physical effort. The small apartment fills with the thick, humid air and the smell of wet, soapy cloth mixed with the ever-present smell of coal, smoke and cooking. You offer to help, and she gratefully accepts, letting you take over the scrubbing while she tends to the baby. Your knuckles are soon raw from rubbing against the coarse fabric and the sharp edges of the board. The dirty water splashes onto your clothes and the floor around you. After scrubbing, the clothes must be rinsed. This requires more water from the bucket. Maria carefully pours a little over the clothes, trying to get the soap out without using too much. The concept of a thorough, clean water rinse is a luxury you cannot afford. The clothes are cleanish, but they retain a faint, greasy film or soap residue. A little-known fact about laundry in these conditions: like base soap was common and cheap, but incredibly harsh. It was great at cutting through grease and grime, but it was brutal on both fabrics and skin. Women's hands were often chapped, red, and cracked from the constant exposure to the harsh soap and the cycle of wet and dry. It was a small daily pain that was simply part of being a woman in the tenement. Now comes the biggest problem: drying. There's no backyard with a clothesline, no sunny space to hang things. You have to get creative. Maria shows you. She wrings each piece of clothing out by hand, her and your cousin whisking the fabric, until every possible drop of water has been squeezed out. Then, she strings a rope from one corner of the room to the other, right over the bed and the table. She hangs the wet clothes on this indoor line. Water drips onto the floor, onto the bed, onto the table. It drips on you as you move around the room. The apartment is now a damp, humid cave, draped in wet, sagging laundry. The clothes will take a full day, maybe two, to dry completely in this unventilated space. For the next 48 hours, you will live, eat, and sleep surrounded by clammy, slowly souring fabric. This sight, the indoor clothesline, or Italian flag as it was sometimes dismissively called due to the large number of Italian immigrants, was a defining feature of tenement life. But it also posed a serious health risk. The constant dampness it created was the perfect environment for mold to grow on the walls and for bacteria to thrive. Historians are still debating the direct correlation, but many contemporary reformers were convinced that the practice of indoor drying significantly contributed to the high rates of respiratory illnesses like bronchitis, pneumonia, and, most terrifyingly, tuberculosis. The very act of trying to be clean was making the living space more dangerous. You look at the clothes hanging limply in the dim light. They represent a paradox. They are a symbol of hard work, of a desperate attempt to maintain standards of hygiene and dignity in an environment designed to crush both. Yet they are also a source of the very dampness and foul that makes this place so unhealthy. You see your cousin come in from his day at the factory. He ducks under a wet shirt without a word, accustomed to navigating this domestic obstacle course. He doesn't complain about the dampness or the smell. This is just what laundry day looks like. You think about what it would take to have truly clean clothes. You'd need unlimited water, which you don't have. You'd need a private space to wash, which you don't have. You'd need sun and fresh air to dry, which you don't have. Cleanliness, you realize, is not a matter of effort. It's a matter of resources. It's a form of wealth. Here in this small, dark room, you can work yourself to the bone and still only achieve a state of being less dirty. It's a frustrating, Sisyphean struggle, and the wet laundry hanging over your head is its flag. As dusk falls, the room, already dim, sinks further into shadow. The wet laundry hanging from the ceiling seems to absorb what little light remains. Maria lights the single gas jet on the wall, and it hisses to life, casting a familiar, flickering yellow glow over the scene. It's time to think about dinner. The kitchen is not a separate room, but a designated corner of this all-purpose space. It consists of the small coal stove, a rickety wooden shelf holding a few tin plates and cups, and a small, lidless wooden box on the floor that serves as the pantry. Your role in the evening's preparations is to peel potatoes. Maria hands you a small, dull knife and a bowl of potatoes she bought from a pushcart vendor that afternoon. You sit at the small table, the boarder still silently reading his newspaper across from you. As you begin to peel, you notice the potatoes are not the firm, clean vegetables you might be used to. They are soft in places with a few sprouting eyes and dark, mushy spots that you have to carve out. The quality of food available to the poor was notoriously low. Pushcart vendors sold what was cheap, and what was cheap was often what was old, bruised. and on the verge of spoiling. There were no food safety regulations, no sell-by dates. You bought what you could afford and hoped for the best. Maria is chopping onions under small, crystal-like piece of beef on a wooden board balanced on her lap. There is no counter space. Every surface is already in use. The stove, a small cast iron box, is the temperamental heart of the kitchen. It's used for heating the room in winter, heating laundry water, and cooking all the meals. Today, like every day, it has been running for hours, radiating a dry, oppressive heat into the already stuffy room. She throws the meat and onions into a pot with some lard, and a sizzling sound fills the room, accompanied by a plume of greasy smoke. There is no ventilation, no exhaust fan, no open window to the outside. The smoke hangs in the air, mingling with the steam from the laundry and the fumes from the gaslight. It stings your eyes and catches in the back of your throat. Within minutes, a thin film of grease seems to coat every surface in the room, including your skin. This is why the walls feel sticky and why there's a perpetual haze in the air. A fascinating and slightly disgusting tidbit: without refrigeration, keeping food fresh for even a day was a major challenge. Families would buy only what they needed for a single meal, but for things like milk, which turns sour quickly, people relied on a hokey-pokey man who sold small, often unsanitary, scoops of ice, or they used a simple window box. This was just a wooden crate nailed to the exterior windowsill, acting as a makeshift refrigerator in the winter. It was mostly useless, and food poisoning was a constant, nagging threat. The main meat is a thin, watery stew of potatoes, onions, and the small amount of beef, stretched to feed 7 people. It's served with thick slices of dense dark bread. As you eat, huddled around the table and on the bed, you are acutely aware of the environment. The air is thick with smoke and dampness. A drip from a drying shirt lands perilously close to your bowl. You can hear the couple in the next apartment arguing loudly through the thin wall. It is the opposite of a peaceful family dinner. Historians often struggle to reconstruct the diet of the tenement pool. Official records and budgets tell one story, but personal diaries and accounts tell another. But they would save their pennies to buy ingredients for a proper Sabbath challah or a Sunday pasta sauce. These meals were about more than just sustenance. They were a vital link to their culture and identity, a small act of defiance against the homogenizing force of poverty. After the meal, it's time to wash up. Maria takes the tin plates to the basin of now cold, greasy water that was used for washing hands earlier. She scrubs them as best she can with a rag without any more soap. They are not so much clean as they are scoured. She dries them and puts them back on the shelf, ready for tomorrow's meals. The pot, the leftovers to save for the next day. Nothing is wasted. You sit back, your stomach full with the heavy, starchy meal. You look around the small, chaotic room, the laundry hanging overhead, the smoky air, the dirty dishes put away. This is the domestic reality. A constant, grinding cycle of making a mess and cleaning it up with inadequate tools in an inadequate space. The simple act of preparing and eating a meal, something that should be a comfort, is itself a source of more grime, more smoke, more work. Bone-weary exhaustion that has little to do with your own labor and everything to do with witnessing the sheer, unending effort required to simply get through a single evening. The meager dinner is finished, and the plates have been wiped and put away. You are left with a small pile of potato peels, onion skins, and a single, well-gnawed beef bone. You look around for a garbage pail, a place to dispose of this refuse. There isn't one. You ask Maria what to do with it. She takes the scraps from you without a word, walks to the window that faces the rear yard, and opens it. Not the front window overlooking the street, but the one at the very back of the railroad apartment, in the small third room that might be a kitchen or a storage space. This window doesn't look out onto an open space, but directly into the narrow, dark air shaft that separates your building from the one behind it, the same shaft that houses the privies at its base. She unceremoniously scrapes the garbage from the plate, and you watch as the potato peels and onion skins flutter down into the darkness. You hear a faint, soft thud as they land on something far below. She closes the window, and that's it. The garbage has vanished. You have just been introduced to the building's primary method of waste disposal, the air shaft garbage chute. You stare at her, a little stunned by the casualness of the act. She sees your expression and gives a weary shrug. "Everyone does it," she says. "Where else can it go?" She has a point. There is no municipal garbage collection service that comes to your door. In some slightly more organized neighborhoods, there might be designated barrels on the street corner that are emptied once a week, but they are often overflowing, surrounded by a sea of refuse. For a family on the 4th floor, hauling their daily kitchen scraps down for flights of stairs to an already disgusting barrel is a low priority in a day filled with more urgent tasks, like hauling 40-pound buckets of water up those same stairs. So, the air shaft becomes the de facto ground. It's quick, it's easy, and it gets the rotting food out of your tiny apartment. Out of sight, out of mind. The problem is it's not out of sight for everyone, and it's certainly not out of the building. A fascinating, and rather horrifying, detail about this practice is the sheer volume of the accumulated waste. Reformer Jacob Riers, whose photographs would later expose these conditions to the world, described air shafts, where the pile of garbage and refuse reached up to the 2nd, and sometimes even the 3rd, story. It was a vertical landfill, a layered cake of one building's history of decay, sitting just feet from people's kitchen and bedroom windows. This pile of rotting organic matter was a paradise for vermin. It was a city-state of rats, a thriving metropolis of cockroaches. They bred in the darkness and the filth, and from this central base of operations, they launched expeditions into the building itself, squeezing through cracks in the floorboards and walls, becoming the unwelcome, ever-present roommates of every family. And then there was the smell. On a hot, humid summer day, the stench rising from this decomposing column of garbage was unbearable. It would waft in through the windows that families were forced to open for any hope of a breeze, filling their homes with a foul, gag-inducing odor. The very feature of the building designed to provide light and air was, in fact, delivering darkness and poison. The term air shaft itself is a cruel irony. It was a concept born out of the Tenement House Act of 1879, often called the Old Law. This law mandated that every habitable room must have a window. To comply, builders created these long, narrow indentations between buildings. The idea was that they would allow for some ventilation and a sliver of light. In reality, they were too narrow to let in as stagnant wells of foul air and conduits for noise. Historians are still divided on whether the architects and builders of the time were genuinely ignorant of the consequences, or if they were cynically exploiting a loophole in the law to maximize profit, while doing the absolute minimum required for compliance. It's a classic case of the letter of the law being followed while its spirit was utterly betrayed. You think about the potato peels you just watched disappear into the gloom. They have now joined the refuse from dozens of other families' coffee grounds. Fish bones, spoiled cabbage, eggshells, and things you don't even want to imagine. Down in the darkness, this pile is decomposing, breeding flies, feeding rats, and sending its foul breath back up into the homes of the very people who created it. You look at the closed window. It's a portal to a hidden vertical sewer. The building has a dark, rotten core, and every resident is compelled by the circumstances to contribute to it. The logic is inescapable and terrible. Keeping your own small space clean means making the collective space, the space you all share, just a little bit dirtier. It's a perfect, closed system of filth, a problem that feeds itself, growing day by day, one handful of garbage at a time. As the evening wears on, you begin to realize that living here is a process of sensory recalibration. Your eyes have adjusted to the perpetual gloom, but your nose is still struggling to make sense of the world. You're learning that the building doesn't have one single monolithic smell of poverty. Instead, it has a complex, layered, and ever-shifting olfactory landscape. You are, in effect, learning to read the air. You sit on your patch of floor, listening to the murmurs of the family settling down for the night. You close your eyes and focus on what you can smell, trying to dissect the symphony of odors that fills your small apartment. The foundation of it all, the bass note, is dampness. It's a mix of the wet laundry hanging overhead, the steam from the cooking pot, and a deeper, more ancient dampness that seems to emanate from the very walls of the building. It's the smell of plaster that has never truly dried, of wood slowly rotting, of mildew thriving in the dark corners. Layered on top of that is the sharp, acrid smell of coal smoke from your own stove. Mixed with the ghosts of coal smoke from every other stove in the building, it seeps through the floorboards, the ceiling, and the walls. It's a smell that gets into your clothes, your hair, and the back of your throat, a constant reminder of the energy source that keeps this world running. Then comes the food. The ghost of your own potato and beef stew is still heavy in the air, a greasy, savory scent. But through the walls, you can smell what your neighbors are eating. From one side comes the unmistakable, pungent aroma of garlic and tomatoes a family is making sauce. From the other side, a fainter, sweeter smell of simmering cabbage and onions. A little historical tidbit: these smells were a source of both comfort and conflict. The smell of their native cuisine cooking in a neighboring apartment could be a powerful, comforting reminder of home. To nativist reformers, however, these foreign smells were often cited as evidence of the immigrants' supposed uncleanliness and inability to assimilate. Smell was, in a very real way, politicized. And then, a new scent drifts in through the closed window that faces the air shaft. It's the foul, sour breath of the garbage pile and the privies below. It's not constant, but it comes in waves, a sudden, nauseating reminder of the building's rotten core. It's a smell of decay, pure and simple. Underneath it all is the constant, subtle smell of unwashed bodies. In a room with 7 people, with water being a precious, rationed commodity, daily bathing is an impossibility. A weekly sponge bath from a basin is a more likely reality. The air is thick with the close, human smell of sweat and stale skin. It's not an aggressive odor, just a simple, physical fact of so many people living in such a small space. There's another smell you can't quite place. It's a chemical, slightly acrid scent. Your cousin's wife, Maria, is working at the table under the gaslight. She's not mending clothes. She's making artificial flowers. Her nimble fingers twist brightly colored scraps of fabric and thin wires into crude but cheerful-looking roses. This is piecework. Many families supplemented their income by turning their apartments into tiny, unregulated factories. They would make flowers, roll cigars, or most commonly, finish garments for the clothing industry. The chemical smell is from the cheap dyes in the fabric and the glue she uses to affix the petals. This introduces another layer to the building's sensory world: the smell of industry. The rhythmic thump of a sewing machine you heard earlier, the chemical smell of dyes, the sharp scent of tobacco from a cigar rolling family down the hall. The line between home and factory has been completely erased. Historians are still debating the full extent to which this homework system impacted family life and health. On one hand, it allowed mothers to earn money while still caring for their children. On the other, it meant the workday never ended, filling the air with dust, lint, and chemicals, and often forcing young children into labor. Was it a form of empowerment or a form of exploitation? Like everything else in this world, it was complicated. You lie down on your bed of rags on the floor. You close your eyes, but the smells are still there. They tell the story of the building. The dampness is its foundation. The coal smoke is its breath. The cooking odors are its diverse soul. The stench from the air shaft is its secret shame. And the chemical scent of piecework is its restless, unending labor. You realize with a sinking heart that you will never be able to simply breathe here. Every breath is an act of interpretation, a deep inhale of all the joy, misery, and struggle contained within these 4 walls. And as you drift into an uneasy sleep, these smells follow you into your dreams. You are jolted from an uneasy sleep by a sound. It's a faint, dry, scratching noise accompanied by a rapid, delicate skittering. It seems to be coming from the wall right next to your head. You lie perfectly still, your eyes wide open in the darkness, straining to hear. There it is again, closer this time. It's the sound of tiny claws on wood. Then you feel it, a flicker of movement across your blanket. You let out a small, involuntary gasp and sit bolt upright, pulling your legs up to your chest. The sudden movement is answered by a furious scramble of activity in the darkness. You can't see anything, but you can hear it, the frantic patter of dozens of tiny feet scattering into the shadows. Your cousin, awakened by your gasp, lights a match. The flame flares to life, and in its brief, flickering light you see them. Two large rats, their fur sleek and dark, vanish into a crack in the floorboards near the stove. And on the floor dozens of cockroaches, like a moving carpet of black jewels, scatter away from the light, disappearing into the countless fissures and crevices of the room. The match goes out, plunging the room back into absolute darkness. But the image is burned into your mind. They get brave at night, your cousin says, his voice a low rumble in the dark. He doesn't sound surprised or alarmed, just weary. You get used to it. You have just been formally introduced to the other residents of the tenement, the ones who don't pay rent. The vermin are not occasional visitors, they are cohabitants. They are part of the ecosystem, as integral to the building as the bricks and mortar. The rats are the kings of this domain. They are bold, intelligent, and relentless. They thrive in the filth of the air shafts and the overflowing privies, feasting on the endless supply of garbage. From there they establish highways throughout the building, traveling inside the walls, under the floorboards, and along the plumbing pipes. They can squeeze through a hole the size of a quarter. No apartment is safe. They gnaw through sacks of flour, spoil food. A weirdly fascinating, if stomach-turning, historical fact is the rat-baiting pits that were a popular form of entertainment in some 19th century cities. Men would place bets on how long it would take a terrier dog to kill a specific number of rats in an enclosed pit. It was a brutal, bloody sport, but it speaks to the sheer ubiquity of rats and the public's morbid fascination with them. For you, in this tenement, the battle is not a sport, it's a nightly reality. Then there are the insects. Cockroaches are the most visible, a constant, rustling presence in the dark corners of the room. They are drawn to any crumb of food, any drop of water. But there are other, more intimate invaders. Bed bugs are a scourge. They live in the mattress, in the cracks of the bed frame, in the wallpaper. And they come out at night to feed on human blood, leaving behind rows of itchy, red welts. Families would try to fight them, pouring boiling water on the bed frames or using noxious chemicals, but it was a nearly impossible war to win. Historians continue to debate the full psychological toll of living with a constant vermin infestation. It's one thing to deal with dirt, but it's another to live in a home that you can never truly call your own, a space that is constantly being invaded and contested by other creatures. It created a sense of perpetual anxiety, a feeling of being under siege in your own home. Did it contribute to a sense of fatalism, a belief that the filth was simply unconquerable, or did it fuel a desperate, daily struggle for control over one's own small patch of the world? You lie back down, but sleep is now impossible. Every tiny creak of the building, every rustle in the walls, sounds like an approaching pest. You pull your thin blanket up to your chin, creating a flimsy, psychological barrier against the unseen world that shares your room. The problem, you understand, is structural. The building itself is the perfect habitat. The air shaft is a self-replenishing buffet. The old, decaying wood and crumbling plaster provide endless hiding places and highways. The darkness is their shield. Trying to get rid of the pests in your own apartment is like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. As long as the building itself is sick, every room within it will be infested. You think of the children sleeping soundly in the corner. This is their normal. They have probably never known a night without the scratching in the walls or the fear of something crawling on them in the dark. The thought fills you with a profound sense of sadness and a hot surge of anger. The first hint of grey dawn begins to seep into the room, a welcome reprieve from the terrors of the night. The scratching in the walls subsides as the rats and roaches retreat back to their daytime hiding places. The battle is over for now, but you know they are still there, waiting in the darkness, a hidden, creeping layer of filth and fear that underpins every moment of life in this building. You have survived your first night, but the welcome has been a chilling one. The seasons change, and the relentless chill of your first few weeks in New York gives way to the suffocating heat of summer. You had thought the winter was the worst of it, with its biting drafts and frozen water pipes. You were wrong. The tenement in summer is a special kind of hell. The building, a solid mass of brick and mortar, becomes a giant heat sink. All day long, the dark brick facade absorbs the relentless sun, and it radiates that heat inward. By late afternoon, The walls of your fourth-floor apartment are warm to the touch. The air, already thick and stagnant, becomes heavy, wet, and oven hot. The single window facing the street offers no relief. The street below is a canyon of shimmering heat, the cobblestones radiating warmth. There is no breeze, only the hot, exhaust-like breath of the city. Opening the window doesn't let fresh air in it, just invites more heat, more dust, and the amplified roar of the street. The other window, the one facing the air shaft, is even worse. The air shaft, that narrow, dark chasm, becomes a chimney. But instead of drawing smoke out, it seems to draw heat down. The sun beats on the roof and the upper walls, and the trapped, superheated air sinks, gathering the foul odors of the garbage pile and the privies at the bottom, and delivers this hot, stinking cocktail directly into your apartment. Opening that window is an act of desperation, a choice between suffocation and nausea. Your tiny apartment, home to 7 people, becomes an unbearable pressure cooker. The coal stove, a source of comfort in the winter, is now a malevolent enemy, but it must be lit. You still need to cook, to heat water for a hopeful wash. Lighting the stove feels like an act of self-punishment, adding another layer of intense, localized heat to the already blistering room. The air becomes thick with greasy smoke that has nowhere to go. Sweat slicks your skin within moments of waking and doesn't dry until the middle of the night. A curious, little-known aspect of this heat was its effect on sleep. Sleep became a precious, hunted commodity. Inside the apartments it was simply too hot. So the people of the tenements would spill outside, seeking any pocket of cooler air. They would sleep on the fire escapes, those rickety iron balconies that were mandated by law but were never intended for habitation. They would become crowded, multi-level dormitories, families sprawled out on thin mattresses or blankets, just feet away from their neighbors. It was a precarious, dangerous, and utterly public way to sleep. They would also sleep on the stoops, on the sidewalks, and most prized of all, on the roofs. The roof was the tenement's Riviera. It was the one place where you might catch a faint breeze off the river. On a hot night, the rooftops of the Lower East Side were covered with hundreds of sleeping bodies, a vast, silent community of souls seeking refuge from the infernos below. This rooftop sleeping culture is a forgotten chapter of New York history, a testament to human adaptability in the face of extreme discomfort. Historians debate whether the summer or the winter posed a greater threat to tenement dwellers. Winter brought freezing temperatures and the risk of pneumonia, but it also slowed the decomposition of garbage and the spread of some diseases. Summer, however, was the season of death. The heat exacerbated diseases like cholera and typhoid fever. Food spoiled almost instantly, leading to rampant food poisoning. And infant mortality rates skyrocketed during the summer months, a tragedy so common it was grimly referred to as the summer complaint. The combination of heat, filth, and spoiled milk was a death sentence for thousands of babies. You spend your days in a state of lethargic misery. The work doesn't stop. Maria still has to make her artificial flowers, her fingers sticking to the gluey fabric. The children, listless and irritable, whine in the heat. You try to create a breeze by waving a piece of cardboard, a futile gesture that only serves to circulate the hot, soupy air. In the evening, you join the exodus. You climb the final flight of stairs, a set of even steeper, ladder-like steps, and push open the heavy metal door to the roof. The blast of relatively cooler air is a physical relief, like stepping into a different world. The roof is already crowded. Families have staked out their small territories with blankets. You find a small, empty patch of tar paper near the chimney. Below you, the city stretches out, a grid of flickering lights. The roar of the streets is softer up here, a distant, constant hum. You can see other rooftops, all dotted with the same ghostly white shapes of sleeping families. It's a strangely beautiful and deeply sad sight. You lie down on the rough, gritty surface of the roof. The tar is still warm from the day's sun. You are exposed under the vast open sky, but for the first time all day, you can breathe. You are not in your cramped, suffocating room. You are part of this silent, sprawling rooftop tribe, all of you sharing the same small mercy of a faint night breeze. The dream of a new life feels distant and absurd, but up here under the stars, For a few precious hours, you can at least escape the oven. The fleeting relief of summer nights on the roof eventually gives way to the sharp, biting winds of autumn, and then the deep, unforgiving cold of winter. The tenement, which was an oven in August, now transforms into an icebox. The same architectural flaws that trap the summer heat now conspire to make the winter unbearable. The thin, single-pane glass windows offer almost no insulation. Icy drafts snake in through the ill-fitting sashes and cracks in the frame. You stuff rags and old newspapers into the gaps, a desperate, flimsy defense against the relentless cold. The brick walls, which once radiated heat, now seem to leach warmth from the very air, their surfaces perpetually cold and damp to the touch. Your small coal stove, a malevolent presence in the summer, is now the family's sole source of survival. It is the sun around which your tiny, domestic solar system revolves. Keeping it fed is a constant, expensive struggle. Coal is not free. It has to be bought from vendors, often by the sack or even by the bucket, at prices that feel in by the bucket, at prices that feel extortionate. Every lump of coal is precious. You learn to bank the fire at night, preserving the embers so you don't have to waste precious kindling to restart it in the morning. The stove heats only the immediate area around it. While it might be tolerably warm if you are huddled next to it, the far corners of the room remain frigid. A single bed pushed against an exterior wall is an island of cold. The family sleeps piled together under a mountain of every blanket, coat, and scrap of fabric they own, sharing body heat to survive the night. Your spot on the floor is the coldest of all. You sleep fully dressed, your shawl wrapped around your head, your breath plumbing in the air. One of the most dangerous and little discussed aspects of winter was the threat of fire. With every family relying on a coal stove and a cramped, cluttered space filled with flammable materials like cloth and newspaper, the risk was enormous. A stray spark, an overheated stovepipe, a moment of carelessness and the entire building could go up in flames in minutes. The narrow, rickety stairs that were your daily trial would become a death trap. The quest for water, a back-breaking chore in the summer, becomes a perilous one in winter. The single spigot in the yard freezes solid. It has to be thawed each morning, often by pouring buckets of precious, heated on the stove water over it, just to get it to work. The ground around the pump becomes a treacherous sheet of ice, a minefield of black ice hidden under a dusting of soot and snow. A slip and fall could mean a broken bone, a catastrophic injury in a world with no health insurance and no sick days. Then there is the problem of the pipes inside. The water pipes for the few, slightly more modern tenements that had sinks in the hallways would often freeze and burst, causing floods that would then turn to ice. And the privies in the rear yard, they become monuments of frozen misery. The waste in the pits freezes solid. The wooden seats are covered in a layer of frost that bites at the skin. The journey to the privy, already a descent into filth, now becomes an act of heroic endurance against the cold. Historians are divided on the question of community solidarity during these harsh months. Some accounts paint a picture of increased cooperation of families sharing fuel, huddling together for warmth, and looking after their neighbors' children. It was a time when the shared enemy of the cold brought people together. Other sources, however, suggest that the extreme hardship led to a breakdown of social bonds, a survival of the fittest mentality, where families looked out only for themselves, hoarding fuel and food. The reality, most likely, was a complex and shifting dynamic, changing from building to building, and even from door to door. You spend your days as close to the stove as possible. The windows are sealed shut against the cold, meaning there is zero ventilation. The air is thick with coal smoke, cooking smells, and the stale recycled breath of 7 people. The dampness from the laundry, which now takes 3 or 4 days to dry, hangs in the air, making the cold feel even deeper. The wet, bone-chilling cold that seeps into your joint. You look at the window, at the beautiful, delicate patterns of frost that have formed on the inside of the glass. It's a small, fleeting moment of beauty in the oppressive gloom. But you know what it represents. It means the air inside the room is warm and humid enough to condense and freeze when it hits the frigid glass. It's a sign of the life-giving heat from the stove, but also a sign of the life-threatening cold, but is just millimeters away on the other side of the pane. Winter in the tenement is a siege. You are not just living, you are enduring. Every day is a battle to stay warm, to stay dry, to secure enough fuel to make it through to the next morning. The city outside is covered in a blanket of white snow, which from your fourth floor window might look peaceful and pure. But you know that down on the streets, that snow is quickly turning into a grey, filthy slush, just another layer of misery to be trudged through. The promise of a new life, which flickered on the ship, feels like a distant, frozen memory. Now the only goal is survival. The relentless cycle of heat and cold, of dampness and filth, begins to take its toll not just on your spirit, but on the physical bodies of the people around you. Sickness is a constant presence in the tenement, as common as the rats in the walls. Colds, flus, and stomach ailments sweep through the building, passing from one family to the next with terrifying speed. But there is one sickness that is spoken of in hushed tones with a particular kind of dread. It starts subtly. The boarder who shares your apartment begins to cough. At first it's just a dry, hacking cough that he dismisses as a winter tickle. But it doesn't go away. It deepens, becoming a wet, rattling sound that echoes in the small room during the quiet hours of the night. He starts to lose weight. His already thin frame becomes gaunt, his cheeks hollow. He sweats at night, soaking his thin mattress, even on the coldest evenings. He has no appetite, pushing away the meager food Maria offers him. His skin takes on a pale, almost translucent quality. You are witnessing the classic, tragic progression of pulmonary tuberculosis. In the 19th century, they didn't call it tuberculosis. They called it consumption, a terrifyingly descriptive name. The disease literally consumed its victims from the inside out, wasting them away until they were nothing but skin and bone. They also called it the White Plague because of the extreme pallor of its sufferers. It was the leading cause of death in the Western world at the time, but it thrived with a special virulence in places like the Lower East Side. The tenement was a perfect incubator for the disease. Tuberculosis is caused by a bacterium, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which is spread through the air when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or even speaks. The bacteria can hang in the air for hours, waiting to be inhaled by a new host. Now picture your apartment. One small, overcrowded room. No ventilation. The windows are sealed shut for half the year to keep out the cold. Every time the boarder coughs, he releases millions of these invisible microbes into the stagnant shared air. You are all breathing it in. The baby, the children, your cousin Maria. A rather chilling historical fact is the longevity of the tuberculosis bacterium. It can survive for weeks in a dried state, in dust or on surfaces. In a dark, damp environment, protected from sunlight, it can last even longer. The dark, windowless interior rooms of the tenement were not just unpleasant, they were reservoirs of disease, places where the germs could settle and wait. The very dust motes dancing in the occasional sunbeam filtering through the front window were potential carriers of death. There is no cure, at least, not one available to you. The wealthy could be sent to sanatoriums in the mountains, places with fresh, dry air and plentiful food, which sometimes helped. For the poor, a diagnosis of consumption was a death sentence. It was just a matter of time. You watched the boarder fade. He is too weak to work, so he loses his job. He can no longer pay his small share of the rent, but your cousin and Maria let him stay. They cannot, in good conscience, throw a dying man onto the street. So he lies in his corner, coughing, wasting away, a constant, living reminder of the plague that haunts your building. His presence adds another layer of fear to your daily life. Every cough from one of the children sends a spike of anxiety through you. Is it just a cold, or is it the beginning you find yourself holding your breath when you are near him? You try to keep the children away from his corner, but in a 10 by 12 foot room, quarantine is a meaningless concept. Historians are still trying to map the exact pathways of infection in these buildings. Was it primarily spread within families? Or did the shared hallways, privies, and courtyards play a significant role? Some studies of the era tried to trace outbreaks, showing how the disease would climb from one floor to the next, following the lines of social contact. It was a slow-motion epidemic, playing out in hundreds of buildings, a crisis that was both invisible and devastatingly present. One evening, the boarder has a particularly violent coughing fit. He presses a rag to his mouth, and when he pulls it away, it is stained bright red. He has started to cough up blood. This is a sign of advanced disease, or the bacteria literally eating away at his lung tissue. Maria sees it, and her face goes pale. You both know what it means. The end is near. The room falls silent. You only sound the man's ragged, painful breathing. The single gaslight hisses on the wall. The fear in the room is a tangible thing, thicker than the coal smoke. It's the fear of a disease you cannot see, that you cannot fight, and that you are all breathing in with every single breath. The white plague has a firm grip on your home. The border's decline accelerates. His world shrinks to his small pile of rags in the corner of the room. The sight of his slow decay, and the ever-present, blood-tinged cough, ignites a desperate need for answers within the community. Whispers and theories about the sickness ripple through the tenement. How does it spread? Why him, and not someone else? How can you protect your family? One evening, as you're sitting on the stoop, trying to get a breath of air that doesn't taste of coal, smoke and sickness, you overhear a conversation between two older women. They are not talking about germs or bacteria. That is a new, fancy idea that doctors are just beginning to discuss, something far removed from their daily reality. This is the miasma theory you encountered when you first discovered the windowless bedroom, but now you hear it being discussed as practical, life or death folk wisdom. One woman is convinced the sickness comes from the foul arising from the produce and the garbage in the air shaft. It's the night air, she says with certainty, her voice slow and conspiratorial. It carries the poison. You must keep your windows shut tight after dark, no matter how hot it gets. The other woman nods in agreement, but adds her own theory. She believes the miasma comes from the cellars. The damp, rotting earth beneath the building, she claims, releases a bad vapor, especially after it rains. She tells a story about a family in the next building who all got sick after their cellar flooded. To her, the cause and effect are clear. This is the dominant medical belief system on the street. It's not just ignorance, it's a framework for understanding a hostile world. The theory, while scientifically wrong, had a powerful, intuitive logic. Bad smells, like those from a decomposing body or a swamp, were associated with death and disease. Therefore, the smells themselves must be the cause. It was a direct, sensory connection. What smells bad is bad. You hear other variations on this theme. Some believe the miasma is worse in certain areas, that some streets are unlucky because they are built on former swamps or burial grounds. Others believe it can cling to clothing and furniture, and they are wary of buying anything second-hand. This leads to a strange and poignant practice. When a person died from consumption, their family would often burn their bedding and clothing, not because they knew about germs, but to destroy the lingering miasma, the ghost smell of the sickness. A curious offshoot of this theory was the belief in good smells as a form of protection. People would carry pouches of fragrant herbs like lavender or rosemary, or hold a handkerchief scented with vinegar to their nose when walking through a particularly foul-smelling street. The idea was that the pleasant smell would overpower the bad air and keep the miasma from entering their body. It was a form of olfactory warfare. In your apartment, Maria sometimes burns a small amount of incense. Its sweet, smoky scent a thin, hopeful shield against the foulness of the air shaft and the growing smell of sickness from the corner. Historians find the persistence of the miasma theory fascinating, especially because it coexisted for decades with the emerging germ theory. The German physician Robert Koch had identified the tuberculosis bacterium in 1882, but it took a very long time for that knowledge to filter down from scientific journals to public consciousness, and even longer for it to be accepted. While the resistance, the debate continues. Some argue it was a lack of education. Psychological reason. The miasma theory, in a way, was more comforting. Think about it. If disease is caused by a bad vapor, you can take action. You can close a window, avoid a certain street, or burn incense. It gives you a sense of control, however illusory. But if disease is caused by invisible, microscopic germs that are everywhere, that you can't see or smell, that's a much more terrifying concept. It renders you helpless. The miasma was a visible, smellable enemy. Germs were an invisible, insidious one. So you listen to the women on the stoop debate the merits of keeping windows open versus closed, of the dangers of cellar bulk versus privy stench. They are, in their own way, public health experts, practicing a form of epidemiology based on folklore, observation, and fear. They are wrong about the mechanism, but their core instinct is right. Their environment is making them sick. They correctly identify the sources of filth, the garbage, the privies, the dampness as the epicenters of the problem. They just misidentify the weapon. It isn't the smell itself, but the invisible bacteria that thrive in the same conditions that create the smell. You go back upstairs to your apartment, the women's words echoing in your mind. You look at the dying border, then at the window facing the air shaft. You don't know what to believe. Do you open it for a breath of air and risk the miasma, or keep it shut and suffocate in the stale, germ-filled room? The right answer seems impossible to know, and every choice feels like a gamble with your life. The border's cough becomes a constant, grim soundtrack to your life. The red on his rags grows darker. He is now confined entirely to his corner, a ghost in the corner of your home. His presence starts to attract a new kind of attention. The neighbors who once offered quiet sympathy now look at your apartment door with a mixture of pity and fear. They hurry past, averting their eyes. Your family is becoming mob. One day, you are returning from a trip to the push carts, climbing the familiar, creaking stairs, when you overhear two men talking on the landing below. They don't know you are there. They are speaking in low, urgent tones. One of them gestures upwards in the direction of your floor. Another one, in that building, he says, it's the whole block. They should just tear it all down. The other man nods grimly. My brother lives a few streets over. He calls it the lung block. Says you can't walk down it without hearing a coffin cough. Lung block. The phrase hits you with the force of a physical blow. It's a name, an official, unofficial designation given by the people who live in its shadow. A place so saturated with consumption that it has earned its own macabre title. You stand frozen on the stairs, listening. They are talking about your home. You have stumbled upon a grim reality of 19th century urban life. Certain areas, certain streets, and even specific buildings became so notorious for their high death rates from tuberculosis that they were given these terrifying nicknames. Lung block was a common one, but there were others, like the ink pot or the ink pot or the fever ward. These were not just bits of morbid folklore, they were often backed up by the grim statistics of public health officials. Health inspectors and early social reformers would create disease maps. They would plot every reported case of tuberculosis on a map of the city. What emerged was a horrifying picture, thick as flies in the poorest, most crowded neighborhoods, particularly the Lower East Side. And within those neighborhoods, they would form dense, dark clouds over specific blocks, and even over individual tenement buildings. Your building, you realize with a sickening lurch, is likely one of the blackest dots on that map. A specific, chilling example of this phenomenon was a tenement in the city's Fifth Ward known as the Gates of Misery. Health records showed that for a period of over a decade, there was not a single year in which that building did not have at least one death from consumption. It was a place where the disease was endemic, passed down from one tenant to the next, almost as if the building itself were infected. The germs thriving in the dark, unventilated rooms would outlive the tenants, waiting for the next family to move in. The two men on the landing move on, their footsteps echoing down the stairs. You are left alone in the gloom, the phrase lung block ringing in your ears. It changes your perception of everything. The street outside is no longer just a chaotic, dirty place, it's a hunting ground for the white plague. The building is no longer just a home, it's a trap. The fear of this taint was a powerful social force. Landlords of notorious buildings had trouble renting rooms, even to the most desperate families. People would walk on the other side of the street to avoid passing by a lung block, and for the families living within one, like yours, it created a profound sense of isolation and shame. You were not just poor, you were contaminated. Historians are still debating the efficacy of this place based on understanding of disease. While it correctly identified high-risk environments, it also led to stigmatization. The focus was often on the unhealthy places and the unclean people who lived in them, rather than on the systemic issues of poverty, housing design, and landlord negligence that created them. It was easier to blame a lung block than it was to confront the economic system that produced it. You finally continue your climb up to the fourth floor. When you reach your door, you pause. You can hear the boarders right coughing from inside. You look at the number 14 painted on the wood. You used to see it as the number of your home. Now, you see it as a mark, a statistic, a dot on a health inspector's deadly map. You open the door and step inside. The air is thick with the smell of sickness. Maria is trying to spoon some broth into the boarder's mouth, but he turns his head away to eat. The children are huddled in the far corner, unnaturally quiet. The whole family seems to be holding its breath, trapped in this small room, in this sick building, on this lung block. The world outside has given your home a name, and it's the name of a tomb. The sickness inside your apartment is a microcosm of the sickness on the street. One morning, you look out the front window and see something that is both commonplace and shocking. The gutter is overflowing with a foul-smelling mix of water and refuse. But piled next to it, on the sidewalk itself, is a small mountain of household garbage. A broken chair, rotting vegetables, and ash from hundreds of coal stoves from a stinking heap that pedestrians have to walk into the muddy street to avoid. This pile has been growing for days. It is a monument to a system that has completely broken down. You ask your cousin why no one is cleaning it up. The street cleaners, he scoffs, not even looking up from his work mending a shoe. They might come once a month, maybe. This is the Lower East Side. We are the last to be remembered and the first to be forgotten. He has just articulated the frustrating reality of municipal services in 19th century New York. The Department of Street Cleaning did exist, but it was notoriously corrupt, inefficient, and politically motivated. It was a key part of the city's patronage system run by the infamous political machine known as Tammany Hall. Here's how it worked. Jobs as street sweepers were not given to the most qualified people. They were handed out as rewards for political loyalty. A neighborhood that voted for the right candidate would see its streets cleaned regularly. A neighborhood that voted the wrong way, or, like the immigrant-heavy Lower East Side, had a large population of non-citizens who couldn't vote at all, would be neglected. The cleanliness of your street was a direct reflection of your political clout. The sweepers themselves were often just names on a payroll, so-called phantom workers who collected a paycheck without ever lifting a broom. The foreman, also political appointees, would sign off on the work, and the whole corrupt system was lubricated by kickbacks and bribes. A funny, if infuriating, historical anecdote tells of one reformer who followed a street cleaning crew for a day. He watched them sweep the filth from the middle of the street into neat piles along the curb. Then, instead of collecting the piles, they simply left them there. A few hours later, the wind and the constant traffic had redistributed the filth back into the middle of the street, right where it started. The sweepers had fulfilled the letter of their job. They had swept the street but had accomplished absolutely nothing. This systemic neglect had devastating consequences. The piles of garbage were not just an eyesore and an olfactory offense. They were breeding grounds for flies and rats, which, as you know all too well, carried diseases from the street into your home. The rotting organic matter would seep into the ground, potentially contaminating the water sources. In the summer, the stench was unbearable. In the winter, the frozen piles of garbage would create dangerous obstacles on the already treacherous sidewalks. This leads to a fierce and ongoing debate among historians who was ultimately responsible for the filth of the tenements. Was it the residents themselves, who threw their garbage into the air shafts and streets, or was it the city government, which failed to provide the basic services that would have made proper disposal possible? Some argue for a culture of poverty, suggesting that the immigrants brought unclean habits with them from their old countries. Vehemently reject this idea, pointing to the systemic failures. They argue that people resorted to dumping their trash out the window precisely because the city had failed them. It wasn't a choice born of ignorance, but of desperation and the lack of viable alternatives. When the system fails to provide a garbage can, the whole world becomes one. You look down at the pile of trash on your street. You can see other women on the stoops, looking at it with the same expression of weary disgust. They are trapped, They worked tirelessly to keep their own small apartments clean, a constant battle against dust and grime. But the moment they step out their front door, they are confronted with a level of filth that is completely beyond their control. It's a soul-crushing paradox. Later that day, you see a team of street sweepers. It's a rare, almost miraculous sight. A small crew of men with brooms and a horse-drawn cart are slowly making their way down the street. But they don't clean the whole street. They only sweep the area directly in front of a saloon on the corner. The saloon owner, you learn, pays a little extra bribe to the crew's foreman to ensure his storefront is kept clear. The mountain of garbage just 50 feet away, they ignore it completely. They get back in their cart and rattle away, leaving the rest of the block to fester. You watch them go, a feeling of bitter helplessness washing over you. The filth is not an accident, it's a policy. It's a choice made by powerful men in faraway offices. Your community is being deliberately neglected, left to drown in its own refuse. You understand now that the dirt is not just dirt. It's a physical manifestation of your powerlessness. Life in the tenement is a relentless grind, a daily confrontation with darkness, filth, and disease. It would be easy to assume that such an environment would crush the human spirit entirely, leaving nothing but despair. But you are beginning to discover that this is not the whole story. In the cracks of this broken world, unexpected moments of grace, kindness, and solidarity manage to bloom. The boarder in your corner is now so weak he can barely lift his head. The family's resources are stretched to the breaking point. The meagerest now has to be stretched even further. But one evening, there's a soft knock on the door. It's the woman from across the hall, the one who had peered at you suspiciously on your first day. She doesn't say a word. She just pushes a small bowl of soup into Maria's hands, gives a curt nod, and disappears back into her own apartment. The soup is hot and rich, far more substantial than your own watery stew. It's a small gesture, but in this context, it's monumental. It's a gift of precious fuel, of hard-won food, from one struggling family to another. You start to notice these small acts of mutual support everywhere. You see it in the morning at the water pump. A young mother, struggling with a baby in one arm and a bucket in the other, is helped by an older woman who takes the baby for a moment so she can work the pump. No words are exchanged, just a shared glance of understanding. You see it on the stoop. When a pushcart vendor tries to shortchange a newly arrived immigrant who doesn't understand the currency, 3 other women who are sitting nearby immediately surround the vendor, arguing loudly in a mix of Yiddish and English until he gives the correct change. They are a self-appointed neighborhood watch, protecting their own. This is the other side of tenement life, the one that the grim statistics and horrified reports of reformers often missed. These buildings were not just collections of isolated, miserable families. They were complex, interwoven communities. The shared experience of being an immigrant and the shared struggle against poverty created powerful bonds of interdependence. A fascinating, and often overlooked, institution of the time was the landsman shaft. These were benevolent societies formed by immigrants from the same hometown or region in the old country. A landsman shaft for people from a specific town in Poland, for example, would provide its members with crucial support. They offered small loans to start businesses, provided health benefits and unemployment insurance long before the government did, and, perhaps most importantly, arranged for proper burials, which was a matter of immense cultural and religious significance. They were a form of grassroots social safety net, created by the community for the community. The hallway, which you once experienced as a dark, smelly, and dangerous place, slowly reveals itself to be the building's central nervous system. It's where information is exchanged. A woman might leave her door ajar, a signal that she has a fresh pot of coffee and is open for a chat. News of a job opening, it'll open down the stairs in minutes. A midwife would be summoned not by a telephone, but by a child sent screaming down the hall. Historians still debate the true nature of this community spirit. Was it a genuine altruistic bond, a holdover from the village life of the old country, or was it a more pragmatic, transcational form of reciprocal altruism? I'll help you today, because I know I will need your help tomorrow. The answer is likely a messy combination of both. In an environment where official institutions had failed them, the people of the tenement had no choice but to rely on each other. Survival was a team sport. One afternoon, one of the children cuts his leg badly while playing in the street. Maria is frantic. They can't afford a doctor, but within minutes, a neighbor from the floor below, a woman rumored to have been a nurse back in Italy, is in your apartment. She calmly cleans the wound with precious soap and water, stitches it up with a regular needle and thread that she sterilizes in the flame of the gaslight, and bandages it with a clean strip of cloth. Though Maria presses a couple of the artificial flowers she made into her hand as a token of thanks. You watch this quiet, competent act of care, and you feel a flicker of something you haven't felt in a long time: hope. Not the grand, abstract hope of the American dream, but a smaller, more immediate hope, rooted in the resilience and decency of the people around you. The building is still a dark, filthy, and dangerous place. The world outside is still hostile and neglectful. But you realize that you are not entirely alone in the struggle. The tenement is a paradox. It is a machine designed to isolate and crush, but by forcing so many people into such close, desperate proximity, it inadvertently forged a community. The darkness was real, but so were these small, defiant glimmers of light. The border's fight ends in the quietest hours of the morning. There is no dramatic final cough. He simply stops breathing. The silence he leaves behind is heavier and more suffocating than the sound of his sickness ever was. Maria weeps silently. Your cousin's face is a stony mask of grief and exhaustion. You have all been living with death for months, and now it is finally a resident in your room. The grim logistics of death in a tenement now begin. An undertaker must be called. The body must be removed, and then the rent must be paid. The day after the border's passing, your cousin sits at the small table, his head in his hands. The loss of the border was not just an emotional blow. It was the difference between making the monthly payment and falling behind. And this brings you to the ghost who haunts every tenement: the landlord. You have never seen him. No one in the building has. He is a name on a lease, an address in a different part of the city, a remote, invisible force that controls your life. He is the one who sets the rent, who refuses to pay for repairs, who ignores the overflowing privies and the collapsing stairs. The landlord of your building is likely not a single wealthy tycoon. The tenement industry in the 19th century was complex. Some buildings were owned by old New York families, their fortunes built on these rental properties. Others were owned by syndicates of middle-class investors, small-time businessmen who saw the immigrant housing market as a source of steady, reliable profit, and, in a twist of historical irony, some tenements were even owned by former immigrants who had made it and were now profiting from the struggles of their own people. Regardless of who he is, his business model is simple and brutal: maximum profit, minimum investment. Every dollar not spent on a plumber, a cleaner, or a painter is a dollar that goes directly into his pocket. The building is not a home to him. It is an asset, a line item on a ledger. The human misery contained within its walls is an externality, a cost not factored into the equation. A fascinating and maddening piece of this history is the role of the rent collector. Landlords rarely dirtied their own hands. They hired agents, often tough, unsentimental men, to go door to door each month. The rent collector was the public face of the landlord's power, a universally despised figure. His arrival on the first of the month was met with dread. If you had the rent, you were safe for another month. If you didn't, he had the authority to begin eviction proceedings, to have you and your belongings thrown out onto the street. This system created a powerful incentive for the tenants to remain silent. Complaining about the leaky roof or the broken stairs was a risky proposition. The landlord could simply choose not to renew your lease, or find another reason to evict you. There was always another desperate family waiting to take your place, a family that wouldn't complain. The fear of homelessness was a powerful tool for enforcing compliance. Historians are still debating the moral culpability of these landlords. Were they purely evil, predatory figures, consciously profiting from human suffering, or were they simply products of their time, operating within a laissez-faire capitalist system that placed no value on social responsibility and had no regulations to rein in their worst impulses? Some scholars argue that by providing housing, no matter how squalid, they were fulfilling a need, providing a service that no one else would. However, conclude that the level of negligence and the sheer scale of the profits extracted from such misery represent a profound moral failure. Your cousin is now faced with a terrible choice. He cannot make the rent. He could try to find another boarder, but who would want to move into a room where someone just died of consumption? He could send Marie and the children out to work more hours, but they are already pushed to their limits. That evening he does something that shows the depth of his desperation. He takes a hammer and a piece of scrap wooden nails a small patch over the rat hole in the floorboards near the stove. He takes a bucket of precious water and scrubs the spot where the boarder lay. He is trying to erase the stain of death, to make the room presentable, to attract a new source of income. You watch him and you understand the trap. The landlord has created a system where the tenants are pitted against each other, competing for scarce resources and forced to police themselves. The filth, the disease, the overcrowding, these are not just conditions, they are tools of control. They keep the tenants weak, desperate, and focused on their own survival, with no energy left to challenge the man at the top who is profiting from it all. The true source of the filth is not the garbage in the air shaft or the overflow in the privy. The true source is the greed of the man you will never meet. A few weeks after the boarder's death, a strange rumor begins to circulate through the building. A man has been seen on the block. A man who is not a resident, not a peddler, and not a rent collector. He is a reporter, they say, but he carries something strange with him, a camera on a clumsy wooden tripod. One evening as you are climbing the stairs, you almost collide with him. He is coming down from the 5th floor, a tall, imposing man with a thick mustache and intense, piercing eyes. He is followed by 2 other men, one carrying the tripod and camera, the other holding a small pan. The man gives you a quick, assessing glance, nods politely, and continues down the stairs. There is a strange, chemical smell in his wake, a sharp, metallic tang you've never encountered before. You have just had a fleeting encounter with Jacob Riers. Riers was a Danish immigrant who had experienced the poverty of New York firsthand before becoming a successful police reporter. For the New York Tribune, his beat was the city's slums. He knew the tenements inside and out, and he was consumed by a righteous fury at the conditions he witnessed. But he faced a problem. His words, his newspaper articles describing the squalor were not enough. His middle and upper class readers, living in their clean, spacious homes uptown, could not truly comprehend the reality. They read his descriptions of dark, windowless rooms, but they still pictured them with the light and air of their own homes. He needed to show them the darkness. And then a new technology emerged that gave him the power to do just that: flash photography. A few years earlier, in Germany, a method had been invented for creating a brilliant, instantaneous burst of light by igniting a mixture of magnesium powder and other chemicals. It was dangerous and unpredictable. The powder could explode prematurely, and the flash produced a huge cloud of thick, acrid smoke. But for Riers, it was a revelation. It was a way to bring the sun into the darkest corners of the tenement. So he formed what he called his photographic squad. He and a few amateur photographer friends would descend on the slums in the middle of the night. They would burst into a tenement apartment or a 7-cent lodging house, set up the tripod, and ignite the flash powder. The chemical smell you noticed on the stairs, that was the lingering scent of the flash powder. What Riers did was, by today's standards, a shocking journalistic intrusion. He rarely asked for permission. He would kick down doors and fire off his flash, capturing his subjects in their most vulnerable moments, waking them from sleep, starting them in their cramped and dirty lodgings. His goal was not to be polite, his goal was to capture the unvarnished, shocking truth. A little-known fact about his method is just how terrifying it must have been for his subjects. Imagine you are asleep in your dark, crowded room, and suddenly, the door bursts open. A group of strange men enter. There is a blinding, silent flash of light brighter than anything you have ever seen, a loud bang, and a huge cloud of choking smoke fills the room. And then, as quickly as they came, they are gone. It must have felt like a supernatural event, a basalt. You hear stories from the family on the 5th floor. They say the men came into their room while they were sleeping. The flash was like a bolt of lightning, the smoke so thick they couldn't breathe. They were frightened and angry. They didn't know what had happened, only that their misery had been stolen in a burst of light. Historians and art critics are still fiercely debating the legacy of Jacob Riis. Is he a pioneering social reformer who used a new technology to expose injustice and bring about change, or is he an exploitative voyeur who sensationalized the lives of the poor, stealing their images without consent and presenting them as exotic, pitiable others for the consumption of the wealthy? The truth is, he was likely both. His motives were, by most accounts, sincere. He genuinely wanted to improve the lives of the people he photographed. However, his methods were invasive, and his captions and writings were often filled with the ethnic stereotypes and moralizing judgments of his era. He saw his subjects as victims who needed to be saved, but rarely as individuals with agency and dignity of their own. You don't know any of this, of course. All you know is that a strange man with a camera under chemical fire is stalking the hallways of your building. His presence is unsettling. It's another intrusion, another violation of the little privacy you have. But his strange, explosive light is a new element in the Tenements ecosystem. It is the light of public scrutiny, and it has the power to burn. Unbeknownst to you, the darkness of your world is about to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light. Months go by. The memory of the strange man with the camera fades, buried under the daily grind of survival. Winter gives way to a muddy spring. Your cousin finds another boarder, a young man who works in a cigar factory, and the fragile household economy is restored. Life in the tenement continues its monotonous, grueling rhythm. Then, one day, your cousin comes home from work with a newspaper someone left on the streetcar. This is a luxury. He spreads it out on the table under the sputtering gaslight. And there, on one of the inside pages, you see it. It's a picture, but it's not a drawing or a painting. It's a photograph reproduced through a new, crude half-tone printing process. And it is a picture of your world. The image is grainy and dark, full of stark blacks and ghostly whites. It shows a group of men sleeping on the floor of a lodging house, their bodies crammed together, their faces weary even in sleep. Another image shows a family in a cramped room, surrounded by piles of cloth. They are garment workers, their home also their factory. But the image that makes your breath catch in your throat is one titled Bandit's Roost. It's a photograph of an alleyway not far from your own street. It's dark and narrow, lined with grim, dilapidated tenements. Men in dark coats and hats stand in doorways and lean against walls, their faces shadowed, their expressions hard. It is a perfect distillation of the poverty and menace that the outside world imagines when they think of your neighborhood. And then you see the words. The article is by that reporter, Jacob Riis. He has published a book, it says, a book full of these photographs and his own impassioned, angry words. It is called How the Other Half Lives. The title hangs in the air of your small room. The other half, that's you. You are the other half. The book is not for you. It is for the people uptown, the people who ride in carriages, who live in houses with multiple rooms and running water. Riis is holding up a mirror, not to you, but to them, and he is forcing them to look at the reflection of the world they have allowed to exist in their own city. How the Other Half Lives, published in 1890, was a sensation. It was a thunderclap. For the first time, the comfortable classes of New York could not just read about the slums, they could see them. Riis's stark, brutal photographs cut through the layers of abstraction and denial. The darkness, the overcrowding, the filth, the child labor, it was all there, inarguable, captured in a flash of magnesium powder. A curious detail about the book's reception is how it shocked people, even those who thought they knew about poverty. One thing that particularly horrified readers was the revelation of the windowless interior rooms. The idea of a bedroom with no access to light or air was so alien to their own experience that it seemed almost impossible. Riis's photographs and his floor plans showing the layout of the railroad apartments made this architectural horror undeniable. The book made Jacob Riis famous and turned him into a leading voice for social reform. His work directly influenced the then police commissioner, Theodore Roosevelt, who would later become president. Roosevelt famously called Riis the most useful citizen of New York, and accompanied him on his midnight expeditions to see the conditions for himself. But the impact of the book is a subject of intense historical debate. Did it truly lead to meaningful change, or did it primarily serve to reinforce negative stereotypes about the poor and the immigrants? Critics argue that Riaz's powerful imagery, combined with his often patronizing text, created a narrative of helpless victims and dangerous slum dwellers, which in turn justified heavy-handed, top-down interventions that often ignored the wishes of the community itself. He gave the poor a face, but he rarely gave them a voice. For instance, his chapter on the Jewish population of the Lower East Side is filled with descriptions of their supposed obsession with money, even as he documents their extreme poverty. He portrays the Italians as passionate and prone to violence. These stereotypes, while common at the time, were now being presented as journalistic fact, backed by the seeming objectivity of a photograph. You don't know any of this academic debate. You are just looking at the smudgy picture in the newspaper. You see the grime and the desperation. But you also see something else. You see the complex social life of the alley. You know that these bandits are also fathers, sons, and husbands, struggling to get by. Riaz's camera captured the surface of your world, its shocking, filthy skin, but it could not capture its heart, its soul, its complicated, messy, and intensely human interior. Your cousin folds up the newspaper. The room is quiet. The book is out there now. The secret of your building, of your block, is a secret no more. A flash of light has exposed your life to the world. The question that hangs in the air unanswered is whether that exposure will bring salvation or just a different kind of damnation. The ripples from Riaz's book spread slowly, but they do spread. The articles in the newspapers are followed by sermons in churches, by debates in the state legislature in Albany, and by hushed, horrified conversations in the drawing rooms of the wealthy. The tenement problem, which had been a niche concern for a few dedicated reformers, is now a public scandal. The city is shamed into action. One day a new set of men appears in your building. They are not residents, and they are not police. They are city inspectors, armed with clipboards and measuring tapes. They move through the building with an air of authority, their presence causing a stir of nervous excitement and suspicion among the tenants. They measure the width of the hallway. They count the number of families. They descend into the rear yard and stare with disgust at the overflowing privies. They even venture into the dark, foul-smelling air shaft. They make notes, they talk in low tones, and they leave. For weeks, nothing happens. The initial flicker of hope dies down, replaced by the usual cynicism. It was just another show, the neighbors mutter. Nothing ever really changes. But then, one morning, a crew of workmen arrives. They are loud, rough, and fill the hallways with the unfamiliar smell of sawdust and fresh mortar. They are here on the orders of the city, armed with the power of a new piece of legislation, the Tenement House Law of 1901. This law, a direct descendant of the public outcry fueled by Riaz's work, is the most powerful and comprehensive housing reform the city has ever passed. The law is a direct attack on the worst features of the tenement. It mandates that every new tenement must be built with a large open-air courtyard. It requires a separate toilet for every single apartment. And, most significantly for you, it has provisions for the old law tenements, the ones already standing. It requires them to be retrofitted to be brought, kicking and screaming, into a new century of sanitation. The first thing the workmen do is attack the privies in the rear yard. They demolish the foul wooden sheds. They excavate the decades of compacted filth from the cesspool, a Herculean task that fills the entire neighborhood with an almost apocalyptic stench for 2 days. Then, they install new, sewer-connected water closets. They are still in the yard, still shared, but they are a vast improvement. Next, they turn their attention to the infamous air shaft. They can't tear it down, but the new law has a clever solution. It requires a clean-out door to be installed at the bottom, and it makes the landlord legally responsible for regulating the garbage. The mountain of refuse that has been the heart of the building's decay is slowly, painstakingly carted away. This slow, arduous process of reform is a topic of much discussion among historians. Was it the result of a moral awakening among the city's elite, as reformers like Riaz hoped, or was it driven by a more selfish fear? The debate continues. But many historians argue that the fear factor was paramount. The upper classes realized that the diseases bred in the slums, tuberculosis, typhoid, Color did not respect neighborhood boundaries. Germs could travel uptown on the clothes of a servant, in a delivery of goods, or in the very air. The purification of the slums was, for many, an act of self-preservation. The most dramatic change comes a week later. The workmen come to your apartment. They are here, they announce, to install a window in the dark interior bedroom. You watch stunned as they use heavy hammers and chisels to punch a hole through the wall that separates the middle room from the hallway. It's a messy, violent process that fills the apartment with plaster dust. But then it's done. A small, frosted glass window no bigger than a medicine cabinet is set into the wall. It doesn't open onto the fresh air of the outside world. It opens onto the dim, stuffy, gaslit hallway. But it lets in light, but a faint, borrowed, artificial light. For the first time, you can see the back of your own bedroom without lighting a lamp. This specific, legally mandated feature, the hallway window, is a fascinating artifact of housing history. It was a compromise, a recognition that you couldn't tear down and rebuild the entire city overnight. It didn't provide ventilation, but it did destroy the absolute, demonic darkness of the interior rooms. It was a half measure, a flawed solution, but it was better than nothing. The change is profound, but it is also slow and bitterly resisted. Landlords fight the new law in court, complaining about the cost of the renovations. They do the absolute minimum required, using the cheapest materials and cutting corners wherever possible. The reforms do not magically transform the tenement into a paradise. It is still overcrowded, still impoverished, still a hard place to live. But something has fundamentally shifted. The darkness has been punctured. The worst of the filth is being addressed. The slow, grinding machinery of government has, for the first time, been brought to bear on the side of the tenants. You stand in your bedroom and look at the faint, grey light filtering through the new window. It's not the sun. It's not the sun. It's not the bright promise of the American dream you once imagined. But it is a start. It is a small, hard-won glimmer of light in the darkness. Years pass. The world outside your tenement changes with a speed that is both exhilarating and dizzying. You see the first automobiles sputtering down the street, terrifying the horses. You hear talk of war in Europe. The city grows taller, louder, and more crowded. Inside your building, the changes are slower, more subtle, but they are real. The most significant change, the one that truly alters the fabric of daily life, arrives in the form of a plumber. One day, workmen are back in the building, this time running iron pipes up through the floors. They install a single, cold water sink in the hallway on each floor. The first time you see water gush from the faucet on your landing, it feels like a miracle. No more hauling 40-pound buckets of water up 4 flights of stairs. No more rationing every precious drop. Water still cold, still shared with your neighbors, but there is now just a few steps from your front door. The revolution is not in the grand gestures of law, but in this small, simple convenience. It gives back hours to the women of the building. It makes washing, cleaning, and cooking immeasurably easier. The perpetual dampness on the stairs from 1,000 spilled buckets begins to dry up for the first time in the building's history. Then comes another innovation. The gas lights in the hallways and in your apartment are replaced by single, bare electric light bulbs. You flick a switch, and a steady, clean, white light fills the room, chasing the shadows into the farthest corners. It doesn't hiss or produce fumes like the old gas jets. It is the clean, modern light of a new century. The darkness, which has been your constant companion, is finally, decisively beaten back. These improvements are not gifts. Your rent goes up to pay for them. The landlord, ever the pragmatist, passes the cost of every city-mandated improvement directly onto the tenants. But it feels like a worthy trade. The community around you is also changing. Some of the old families, the ones who have been here for years, begin to move out. As their children grow up and get better jobs, they leave the Lower East Side for new neighborhoods in Brooklyn or the Bronx, places with more space, more trees, and apartments that have their own bathrooms. Your own family is smaller now. The children have grown. One has moved away, the other is married and lives a few blocks over. The border is long gone, quieter, As old faces leave, new ones arrive. A new wave of immigrants, fleeing new troubles in different parts of the world, moves in. You see in their faces the same mixture of hope and terror that you once felt. You are now the old-timer, the one who knows how things work, the one who can offer a piece of advice or a word of comfort. A strange and poignant historical phenomenon is the gentrification of memory. As former residents moved up and out of the tenements, their recollections of the old neighborhood often softened. The filth, the disease, and the hardship would fade, and they would remember the community, the festivals, the vibrant street life. The Lower East Side, for many, became a place of powerful, nostalgic mythology, a tough, but vital crucible where their American story began. Trying to balance the romanticized memories with the grim, documented reality. One evening you are standing by your front window, looking down at the street. The push carts are still there, but they are joined by delivery trucks. The roar of the city is deeper now, a mixture of horses' hooves, car horns, and the distant rumble of the new subway system. You look around your apartment. It's still small, still cramped. But the walls are clean, repainted just last year. A steady light comes from the bulb overhead. From the hallway, you can hear the faint sound of a neighbor's radio playing music, a sound that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. You think back to your first day, to the overwhelming stench, the suffocating darkness, the soul-crushing labor of just getting water. The journey has been long and hard. You touch the glass of the window. On the other side is the fire escape, once a desperate sleeping porch, now just a place where a neighbor grows geraniums in a pot. You made it. You survived. You endured. You don't live in a palace. The American dream didn't turn out to be a mansion and a green lawn. It turned out to be this: a room with a light that works, a sink in the hall, a window that looks out onto a world of possibility. It's a flawed, battered, and compromised version of the dream. But from where you stand after all you have been through, it looks a lot like progress. It looks a lot like home, a single light bulb, a single faucet, a sliver of light, and a drop of clean water. That was the revolution. And so our journey comes to a gentle close. The sounds of the city, the clatter of the pushcarts, and the distant rumble of the elevated train begin to fade into a soft, indistinct hum. The single bare light bulb in your small room seems to dim, its harsh glare softening into a warm, sleepy glow. The hard edges of the day, the grime and the struggle, dissolve into the quiet comfort of the coming night. You can feel the weight of a long life, the memory of so many seasons passed within these walls. The biting cold of winter, the suffocating heat of summer, they no longer feel like battles to be fought, but like stories that have already been told. The faces of the people you have known, your cousin, his wife Maria, the children, the tragic border, the neighbors who shared their soup and their sorrow, all flicker softly in your mind's eye, like candles in a quiet room, woven into the fabric of your own story. The air itself feels different now. It is still and peaceful. You can almost feel the entire building breathing around you, a slow, deep, rhythmic sigh. It is the sound of 1,000 other souls finally at rest, their own long days finally done. The frantic energy of survival has given way to a profound and well-earned stillness. You are safe here, in this quiet moment, suspended between memory and dream. You can let go of the day, release its weight, and allow yourself to drift on the gentle currents of sleep, carried toward a place of deep and silent peace. The end of the article. Good night.